They told you the pyramids were built by slaves, whipped and starved under the desert sun. Forced labor on a scale the world had never seen. That's the story Hollywood sold you. That's what you learned in school. But what if I told you that's completely wrong? What if the Great Pyramid wasn't built by slaves at all, but by some of the best-paid workers in the ancient world? What if there was a sophisticated economy humming? Beneath those stone blocks, a financial system so advanced it would be matched for thousands of years? What if the pyramids weren't just tombs, but the engine of an economic revolution that transformed Egypt from a collection of villages into the world's first superpower? This is the story they didn't teach you. The hidden economy behind the pyramids, and trust me, it's way more incredible than any story about slaves. Picture Egypt in 2550 BC. The Nile is flooding like it does every single year. But this isn't a disaster. This is the heartbeat of Egyptian civilization. For 4 months every year, the river rises and covers the farmland in a layer of rich, black silt. And during those 4 months, 20,000 farmers have nothing to do. Their fields are underwater. They can't plant. They can't harvest. They're just sitting there. Now, if you re a pharaoh with a god complex and a dream of building a monument that will last forever, you're looking at this situation like it's the greatest opportunity in human history. You've got 20,000 able-bodied men who are idle for a third of the year. Every single year. What if you could put them to work? But here's the thing, and this is where everything you think you know starts to crumble. These men are slaves. They're free citizens. They own land. They have families. They have rights. So you can't just force them to work. You have to pay them. And that's exactly what the pharaohs did. We know this because in the 1990s, archaeologists found something absolutely wild at Giza. Workers' villages, bakeries, breweries, medical facilities, cemeteries with tombs for the workers themselves. And the bones? The bones tell a story that completely destroys the slave narrative. These workers were eating meat, good quality beef and mutton. They were getting medical care. Broken bones had been set and healed. These people weren't being worked to death. They were being taken care of. But this next discovery completely flips the story on its head. Here's where the story suddenly tilts on its head, but it gets even better. We found pay records. Actual ancient payroll documents. And guess what these workers were being paid in? It's beer and bread. Massive quantities of beer and bread. Each worker received about 4 liters of beer and 2 loaves of bread per day. Yeah. That's not survival rations. That's a comfortable living. In modern terms, adjusted for caloric value and purchasing power, these workers were probably making the equivalent of $40,000 to $50,000 a year for seasonal construction work. The pyramids weren't built by an enslaved underclass. They were built by a well-fed, well-paid workforce that showed up every year during the flood season, worked their tails off for 4 months, got paid handsomely, and then went home to their farms when the water receded. Most people don't know this part, but it raises an even bigger question. Where did all that money come from? How did Egypt generate the wealth to pay 20,000 workers for decades? Because the Great Pyramid took about 20 years to build. That's not a one-time expense. That is a sustained economic commitment on a scale that shouldn't have been possible for a Bronze Age society. And the answer to that question, that's where this story gets really interesting. And later in this video, we uncover the one flaw in this whole system, the flaw that actually brought down the entire kingdom. Let's rewind a bit. Let's go back to around 3100 BC Egypt, before the pyramids, before the pharaohs, before the great monuments. What you've got is basically a bunch of farming villages along the Nile. These people have figured out agriculture. They're growing wheat and barley. They're raising cattle. They're doing okay, but they're not special. They're not different from farming communities in Mesopotamia or the Indus Valley or China. But Egypt has something these other places don't. The Nile, and specifically, Nile's completely predictable flooding pattern. Every single year, like clockwork, the river floods. The camera pulls back. Imagine the entire Nile Valley breathing in and out with the rhythm of the floods. The water arrives in June. It peaks in September. It recedes by October. You can set your calendar by it. And this predictability changes everything. Because in Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates flood too. But they're chaotic, unpredictable, devastating. Mesopotamian farmers live in constant fear of floods that can wipe out entire settlements. They have to build elaborate irrigation systems just to survive. They have to form large, organized societies to manage the water. That's why you get the first cities in Mesopotamia. Cooperation is survival. But in Egypt, the flood is a gift. Blessing. It arrives on schedule, deposits its fertile silt, and leaves. Egyptian farmers don't need massive irrigation projects. They don't need large-scale cooperation to survive. They just need to plant when the water recedes and harvest before it comes back. It's almost too easy. And this creates a surplus. A big one. Egyptian farmers are producing way more food than they need to survive. And surplus food is the foundation of civilization. Because once you have more food than you need, you can support people who don't farm. Craftsmen, priests, soldiers, bureaucrats, artists. You can build cities. You can develop technology. You can create culture. But here's the thing. Surplus alone doesn't create a great civilization. Mesopotamia had surplus too. It built great cities, invented writing, developed mathematics. They were arguably more advanced than Egypt in many ways. But they didn't build the pyramids. So what made Egypt different? The answer is centralization. Political unity. Around 3100 BC, a king named Narmer conquers all of Egypt and unifies it into a single kingdom. Upper and Lower Egypt become one. And this creates something unprecedented, a single government controlling the entire agricultural output of the Nile Valley. Think about what that means. Every year, the Nile floods. Every year, farmers produce a surplus. And every year, the pharaoh's government takes a portion of that surplus as taxes. It's not in money. They don't have money yet. It's grain. Physical wheat and barley. Thousands upon thousands of tons of it. It's all flowing into government warehouses. And suddenly, the pharaoh is sitting on the largest concentration of wealth in the ancient world. Now, if you're Khufu, the pharaoh, who decides to build the Great Pyramid, you're looking at these warehouses full of grain, and you're thinking, I can mobilize the entire economy. Because grain isn't just food. Grain is money. Grain is power. Grain is how you pay workers. You take that grain, you turn it into bread and beer, and boom, you've got a currency. This is the hidden financial innovation at the heart of the pyramids. And just when you think the system can't get any more advanced, it hits you with another curveball. Egypt essentially invents the world's first large-scale command economy. The government collects taxes and grain, stores it in massive warehouses, converts it into bread and beer through state-run bakeries and breweries, and then uses it to pay workers. It's a closed loop, a self-sustaining system. And it allows Egypt to mobilize labor on a scale that would not be seen again until the Industrial Revolution. And later in the video, we've circle back to this, because this tiny detail becomes the key to Egypt's biggest economic meltdown. But there's more to it than just grain. Because you can't build a pyramid with bread alone. You need stone, copper tools, wood for ramps and sleds, rope, pottery, thousands of different materials and goods. And all of that has to be acquired, transported, and distributed. You need a logistics network, a supply chain, an economy. Hey, if you're digging this story so far, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We're about to get into some absolutely wild stuff about how ancient economies actually worked, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. So here's how it worked. Egypt is divided into regions called nomes. Each nome is basically a district with its own governor, its own temples, its own local economy. And the pharaoh doesn't just extract resources from these nomes, he also mobilizes them. Each nome has a quota. You're responsible for providing a certain number of workers, a certain amount of materials, a certain quantity of food. It's a tax, but it's also a draft, a labor draft. And this is brilliant, because it distributes the cost of the pyramid across the entire kingdom. And here's where the story takes a seriously unexpected turn. But hold on, because this is where things get kind of wild. No single region is being bled dry. Everyone contributes a little. And because the work is seasonal during the flood when farmers farm anyway, it doesn't even disrupt the agricultural economy. It's like the pharaoh found a way to tap into idle economic capacity that was just sitting there unused. But mobilizing 20,000 workers is just the beginning. You also need skilled labor, architects, engineers, masons, surveyors, sculptors. These aren't seasonal workers. These are professionals. And they need to be paid year-round. They need housing. They need food for their families. They need tools and materials. They need a support staff. For every worker actually cutting stone at Giza, there are probably 3 or 4 people supporting them. Bakers making bread, brewers making beer, butchers preparing meat, potters making vessels, weavers making cloth, fishermen bringing in fresh fish from the Nile, hunters bringing in game from the desert. The pyramid site isn't just a construction project. It's a city, a boomtown, a massive economic engine generating wealth and employment. And the evidence is everywhere once you know what to look for. The workers' village at Giza could house about 2,000 people at a time. But we know 20,000 workers were involved in the project, which means they weren't all there at once. They rotated, probably worked in shifts. 3 months on, 9 months off. And during those 9 months off, they're back home, spending their wages, buying goods, creating demand, stimulating the economy. This is actually kind of wild when you think about it. The pyramids created a massive circulation of wealth through the Egyptian economy. The government collected grain from farmers as taxes, converted it to bread and beer, paid workers. Those workers took their wages and spent them on goods and services. Craftsmen and merchants made money. They spent it on other goods and services. The money multiplied as it moved through the economy. Economists call this the multiplier effect. And the pharaohs had stumbled onto it 3,000 years before anyone had a name for it. But here's where it gets really interesting. And if that already sounds insane, wait till you hear this part. All of this economic activity required record keeping. You've got 20,000 workers rotating through. You need to track who's worked, who's been paid, who's owed what. You've got materials coming in from all over Egypt. Limestone from Tura, granite from Aswan, copper from Sinai, cedar wood from Lebanon. All of it needs to be tracked. Quantities, sources, destinations, costs. And the Egyptians developed one of the most sophisticated bureaucracies in the ancient world to manage it all. Scribes everywhere, recording everything. They had forms for labor assignments, forms for material deliveries, forms for rations distributed, forms for tools checked out and returned. If something happened at Giza, there was a scribe writing it down on papyrus or pottery shards. And this bureaucracy wasn't just serving the pyramid project, it was transforming Egyptian society. Because once you have a literate class of administrators managing complex logistics and accounting, you can do so much more than build pyramids. You can manage irrigation projects, organize military campaigns, collect taxes efficiently, administer justice, run a government. The pyramids basically forced Egypt to invent professional administration, and that made them richer, more powerful, more advanced. The economic systems they developed to build the pyramids became the foundation of Egyptian civilization for the next 3,000 years. But there's a darker side to this story. We need to talk about it, because even though the pyramid workers weren't slaves, not everyone in Egyptian society was free. There were slaves, prisoners of war, criminals, debtors, and while they probably weren't the ones hauling limestone blocks at Giza, they were part of the economy. They worked in the fields, in the quarries, in the mines. They did the dangerous, brutal work that kept the system running. And the pyramid economy created demand for this slave labor. Keep this in mind, because it's going to matter when we get to the collapse of the Old Kingdom. Because somebody had to maintain food production while 20,000 farmers were off building monuments. Somebody had to mine the copper for the tools. Somebody had to work the quarries year-round. And increasingly, that somebody was a slave. We don't have great numbers on how many slaves were in Egypt during the Old Kingdom. The records are sparse, and the Egyptians didn't talk about it much in their official inscriptions. But we know slavery existed. We know it was a significant part of the economy. And we know that as Egypt became more militarily aggressive, conquering Nubia, raiding Libya, campaigning in Sinai, they took prisoners. Lots of them. And those prisoners became slaves. So while the pyramid builders themselves were free workers earning good wages, the system that supported them was built partially on unfree labor. It's complicated. It's messy. It's not the clean narrative of either noble free workers or enslaved masses. It's both. It's a sophisticated economy that used every form of labor available to achieve something unprecedented. And here's the twist. The pyramids eventually stopped making economic sense. Because here's what people don't realize. Building the Great Pyramid nearly bankrupted Egypt. The resources required were staggering. The Great Pyramid contains about 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons. That's 5.75 million tons of stone. All of it had to be quarried, transported, lifted, placed, with nothing but human labor, copper tools, and wooden sleds. The logistics alone are mind-blowing. They probably moved about 300,000 tons of stone per year for 20 years. That requires constant work, constant payment, constant food production, constant material acquisition. For 2 decades, the drain on the Egyptian economy must have been enormous. And after Khufu's pyramid was finished, the next pharaoh Khafre built another one, slightly smaller but still massive. And then Menkaure built a third one. The 3 pyramids at Giza represent something like 60 years of sustained maximum economic effort. 3 generations of Egyptians dedicating a huge portion of their productive capacity to building tombs. And you can see the strain in the archaeological record. The later pyramids are smaller. The construction quality declines. The workers' villages shrink. The tension builds right here because the next decision Egypt makes will shape the fate of a civilization. By the end of the Old Kingdom, around 2200 BC, the pyramid building era is basically over. Egypt keeps building pyramids for a while, but they're much smaller, much cheaper, often made of mud brick instead of stone. The age of the Great Pyramids lasted less than 200 years. What happened? Did they run out of stone? Run out of workers? Run out of ambition? No. They ran out of economic capacity. The pyramid-building economy was unsustainable. It required a level of centralized control and resource extraction that eventually broke the system. Because while the pyramid projects stimulated the economy in some ways, they also drained resources that could have been used for other things. Military expansion, infrastructure, trade, development. And here's what's really fascinating. After the Pyramid Age ends, Egypt actually becomes more prosperous. The Middle Kingdom, the period after the Old Kingdom collapses and then recovers, is arguably Egypt's golden age. They expand trade networks, develop new technologies, build more diverse infrastructure, create more sophisticated art and literature, and they do it by not building giant pyramids. It's almost like the pyramids were an economic dead end, spectacular achievement that ultimately cost more than it was worth. But here's the thing. They left behind something more valuable than the monuments themselves. They left behind the economic systems that made them possible. The bureaucracy, the administrative techniques, the logistics networks, the labor mobilization systems, the accounting methods, the organizational knowledge. All of that survived. It became the foundation of Egyptian power for millennia. Most people don't know this part, but Egyptian administrative texts, the boring stuff, the forms and receipts and inventories became templates throughout the ancient world. When other civilizations wanted to organize their economies, they looked to Egypt. The Persians copied Egyptian administration when they built their empire. The Greeks studied Egyptian bureaucracy. The Romans admired Egyptian organization. The pyramids were monuments to dead kings. But the systems that built them became the blueprint for civilization. Now, let's talk about something that's going to blow your mind. The pyramid economy had a dark secret, a structural problem that nobody at the time seems to have fully understood. And it's a problem that would eventually destroy the Old Kingdom. Remember how I said the pyramid economy was based on grain? The pharaoh collects grain as tax, stores it, uses it to pay workers. It's a beautiful closed-loop system, but it has a vulnerability, a single point of failure. Everything depends on the Nile flood being consistent, predictable, reliable, and for most of Egyptian history it was. The Nile flooded like clockwork, year after year, century after century. The Egyptians built their entire civilization on the assumption that the flood would always come, that the river would always provide. They even made the flood a god. Happy, the god of the annual inundation. They prayed to him, built temples for him, celebrated his arrival every year, but around 2200 BC, something goes wrong. The flood fails. It's not just 1 year, multiple years, maybe a decade or more. We're not exactly sure what caused it. Climate change. Drought in the Ethiopian highlands where the Nile's headwaters are. Volcanic eruptions affecting rainfall patterns. Something shifts. And the Nile doesn't flood the way it's supposed to. And without the flood, there's no surplus. Without surplus, there's no tax revenue. Without tax revenue, the pharaoh can't pay the army, can't pay the bureaucrats, can't pay the priests. The entire economic system that sustained Egyptian power just collapses. The old kingdom falls apart. The central government loses control. The nomes become independent. Egypt fragments into a bunch of warring statelets. People are starving. There are accounts of cannibalism, of people eating their own children. It's apocalyptic, all because the Nile failed to flood. This period is called the First Intermediate Period. It's one of the darkest chapters in Egyptian history, and it lasts for over a century. But here's what's wild. When Egypt eventually recovers, when someone finally reunites the kingdom and establishes the Middle Kingdom, they don't go back to building giant pyramids. They've learned the lesson, sort of. They still build monuments, still maintain the bureaucracy, still collect taxes and grain, but they diversify. They invest in irrigation projects to protect against future droughts. They expand trade to bring in resources from outside Egypt. They build military fortresses to protect their borders. They're smarter about it, more strategic. Less obsessed with monuments and more focused on sustainability. But they never fully solve the fundamental problem. Egypt remains dependent on the Nile. The flood is everything. When it fails, which it does again in later periods, Egypt suffers. Every single time. And this raises a question that I think is really important. Most people never hear this next part, but it changes everything. Were the pyramids worth it? Or is the economic sacrifice justified? Did the Egyptians get their money's worth? On one level, obviously, yes. The pyramids still stand. 4,500 years later, they're still there, still inspiring. Still attracting millions of tourists every year. They're arguably the most successful architectural project in human history in terms of longevity and impact. They achieved exactly what they were meant to achieve. They made the pharaohs immortal. But on another level, you have to wonder. What could Egypt have done with those resources if they hadn't poured them into tombs? What if they'd invested in trade, in technology, in expansion? Could they have conquered more territory? Developed new innovations? Become even more powerful? There's actually evidence that Egypt fell behind Mesopotamia technologically during the Pyramid Age. While Egypt was building monuments, Mesopotamia was inventing new tools, new weapons, new administrative techniques. And by the time the Pyramid Age ended, Mesopotamia had developed military technologies, specifically better bronze weapons and chariot warfare, that made them competitive with Egypt despite Egypt's superior resources. The pyramids were a choice, an economic choice. Egypt chose monumental architecture over other forms of investment, and there were consequences to that choice. Some good, some bad, but definitely consequences. If you're still watching, you're exactly the kind of person I make these videos for. So please, hit that like button and drop a comment letting me know what you think. And subscribe if you haven't already. We've got so much more to uncover. Now here's something that's going to tie all of this together. The pyramid economy didn't just affect Egypt. It affected the entire ancient world. Because Egypt's demand for materials created trade networks that stretched across the Mediterranean and into Africa and Asia. And these trade networks became the foundation of the Bronze Age global economy. Let's start with copper. The pyramids required thousands of copper tools, chisels, saws, drills. Copper is the only metal hard enough to work stone that the Egyptians had access to in large quantities. But here's the problem. Egypt doesn't have much copper. There are some deposits in Sinai, but not nearly enough to support the pyramid projects. So Egypt had to import copper, massive quantities of it. And where do they get it? Cyprus, Anatolia, the Levant, regions hundreds of miles away. Egyptian merchants had to establish trade relationships with these distant suppliers, had to negotiate prices, arrange shipments, provide payment in the form of grain, gold, and manufactured goods. They had to build boats capable of carrying tons of copper across the Mediterranean. They had to establish ports and warehouses and security for the shipments.
Oh.
The demand for copper created an entire international trade network.
8.
And that network didn't just carry copper. Once you've got ships sailing between Egypt and Cyprus, why not carry other goods too? So Egyptian merchants start importing cedar wood from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, tin from Anatolia, obsidian from Ethiopia, ivory from Nubia, incense from Punt, and they're exporting too. Egyptian grain feeds the eastern Mediterranean. Egyptian linen cloth is prized everywhere. Egyptian papyrus becomes the writing material of choice for the entire ancient world. Egyptian gold and finished goods, jewelry, furniture, weapons. Art spread across Africa and Asia. The pyramids essentially bootstrapped the Bronze Age global economy. The massive demand for materials and the wealth generated by the pyramid economy made Egypt the center of an international trade network that connected 3 continents. And when merchants from different regions met in Egyptian ports to trade, they didn't just exchange goods. They exchanged ideas, technologies, religions, languages, stories. The cosmopolitan culture of the ancient Mediterranean, the mixing of Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Anatolian, and Levantine influences that would eventually give birth to Greek civilization, was partly a product of the trade networks created by pyramid construction. The economic needs of dead pharaohs literally shaped the cultural development of the ancient world. But there's an even deeper connection. The pyramid economy demonstrated something that would become fundamental to human civilization. It proved that large-scale collective action was possible, that human beings could organize themselves to achieve goals far beyond individual capability, that we could build things that would outlast us, that we could leave a mark on history. Before the pyramids, human achievements were small-scale, personal, tribal. A village builds a temple, chief conquers his neighbors. A craftsman makes a beautiful object. These are individual or small group accomplishments. But the pyramids? The pyramids required thousands of people working in coordination for decades, required a sophisticated economy to support them, required administrative systems to organize them, required engineering knowledge to design them, required cultural unity to motivate them. The pyramids prove that civilization, large-scale, complex, enduring civilization was achievable. And once Egypt proved it was possible, everyone else wanted to do it too. Mesopotamian ziggurats, Chinese imperial tombs, Mesoamerican pyramids, Korwat, Gothic cathedrals, modern skyscrapers, they're all descendants of the same impulse. The same drive to build something that demonstrates our collective power, our ability to transcend individual limitations through organization and cooperation. All of these projects require the same thing the pyramids required: an economic surplus, a way to mobilize labor, a system for organizing resources, an administrative infrastructure. The economic innovations that made the pyramids possible are the same innovations that make all large-scale human achievement possible. So when you look at the pyramids, you're not just looking at ancient tombs. You're looking at the moment when humans figured out how to build the modern world. The economic systems, the administrative techniques, the organizational principles. It all started at Giza. But here's where this story takes its final, most important turn. Because there's one more secret hidden in the pyramid economy. One more revelation that changes everything. And it's this: the pyramid workers knew they were building something important. They weren't slaves being forced to labor against their will. They were participants in a grand national project. And they were proud of it. We know this because of the graffiti. The workers left graffiti all over the pyramid complex, not in the tourist areas. Those were kept pristine. But in the internal chambers, the places nobody was supposed to see, the workers carved their names, their team names. The followers of the powerful white crown of Khufu, the drunkards of Menkaure. These weren't oppressed slaves marking the days until freedom. These were proud teams competing with each other, marking their accomplishments, leaving their mark on history. And for a moment, you can almost feel what they felt. The pride, the pressure, the sense that history was watching them. There are also work songs, preserved in later Egyptian texts, that reference the pyramid projects. And the tone isn't one of suffering, it's one of pride. It's a shared purpose. It's of being part of something greater than yourself. One song talks about how the work was hard, but the beer was good and the companionship was strong. It's almost nostalgic. like veterans talking about their service. This is the part that really gets me. The pyramid economy worked not just because of the financial incentives, not just because workers were being paid, it worked because the workers believed in it. They saw themselves as building eternal homes for god kings who protected Egypt. They saw themselves as contributing to the glory of their civilization. They were invested emotionally, spiritually, culturally, and that's the real secret of the pyramid economy. We're going to return to this idea near the end, because it becomes the emotional heart of the entire pyramid story. It wasn't just an economic system. It was a belief system, shared vision of what Egypt was and what it could be. The financial mechanisms, the grain payments, the supply chains, the administrative systems, those were important. But they only worked because they were embedded in a culture that valued collective achievement over individual gain, that saw monumental architecture as a worthy goal, that believed the pharaoh was a living god whose eternal rest was worth decades of effort. You can't replicate the pyramid economy without replicating that belief system. And that's why, even though we know how they did it, even though we understand the economics and the logistics and the engineering, we can't really do it today, not the way they did it, because we don't have that level of cultural unity, that shared sense of purpose. It's that willingness to sacrifice for collective glory. Modern construction projects are bigger, more complex, or technologically advanced. But they're also more fragmented, more individualistic, more transactional. Workers show up because they're paid. Managers manage because that's their job. Nobody's building a skyscraper because they believe they're contributing to eternal glory. They're building it because someone's paying them to. It's just business. The pyramids were never just business. They were a national mission, a cultural imperative, an economic system built on shared belief, and when that belief faded, when later Egyptians stopped seeing pyramid building as a worthy goal, the economic system that supported it faded too. Not because it couldn't work financially, but because people stopped wanting it to work. And this brings us to the final lesson. It's the most important one. Economics is never just about money. It's never just about resources and logistics and accounting. At its core, economics is about what people value, what they believe is worth doing, what they're willing to sacrifice for. The pyramid economy worked because Egyptians valued immortality, valued divine kingship, valued monumental achievement. When those values changed, the economy changed too. Every economy is like this. The Roman economy worked because Romans valued military glory and urban civilization. The medieval economy worked because people valued the church and feudal hierarchy. The modern capitalist economy works because we value individual achievement and material comfort. The economic systems are just tools for pursuing whatever it is we think matters. And when our values change, our economics change. Always. Every single time. The transition from the Old Kingdom to the Middle Kingdom wasn't just a political shift. It was a value shift. Egyptians decided that sustainability mattered more than monuments, that diversification mattered more than spectacle, and the economy reorganized itself around those new values. The same thing happens today. When we decide that environmental sustainability matters, our economy starts adapting. When we decide that inequality is unacceptable, we create new economic policies. When we decide that certain technologies are worth pursuing, we mobilize resources toward them. The tools are different. The scale is different. But the fundamental dynamic is the same. Economics follows values. Always has. Always will. The pyramids are still standing. 4,500 years later, Khufu got his eternal monument. His name is immortal. Anyone who's interested in ancient history knows who he is. The economic system he mobilized has long since vanished. The workers who built his pyramid are dust. The bureaucrats who organized it are forgotten, but the thing they built together, still there, still inspiring. Still making people wonder how it was done. And maybe that's the ultimate lesson. Maybe the pyramid economy was worth it. Not because of the economic benefits, not because of the technological innovations, not even because of the political unity it created, because it produced something that reminds us, 45 centuries later, of what humans can accomplish when we organize ourselves around a shared vision. When we believe in something bigger than ourselves, when we're willing to invest our resources and our labor and our lives into building something that will outlast us. We don't build pyramids anymore, but we build other things: cathedrals, skyscrapers, space stations, particle accelerators, the internet. These are our pyramids, our monuments to what we value, our attempts at immortality. And they all require the same thing the pyramids required: an economic system that mobilizes resources toward a shared goal, a belief system that makes people want to participate, a vision that's compelling enough to justify the cost. The hidden economy behind the pyramids isn't really hidden at all. It's the same economy that builds everything humans have ever built. The same economics of shared purpose and collective action. The same trade-off between present consumption and lasting achievement. The same question every civilization has to answer: what are we building and why does it matter? Egypt answered that question with the pyramids. And 4,500 years later, we're still talking about it. Still learning from it. Still wondering if we could do something as enduring, as meaningful, as ambitious. Maybe we can. Maybe we can't. But the pyramid economy proves it's possible. Proves that humans can organize ourselves to do extraordinary things. Proves that the right economic system, built on the right values, can move mountains, or at least 2.3 million blocks of limestone. And that's a lesson worth remembering, because we've got our own mountains to move, our own pyramids to build, our own legacy to leave. And like the ancient Egyptians, we'll need more than just money to do it. We'll need belief, purpose, vision. We'll need to decide what matters enough to sacrifice for, what we want to build that will outlast us, what we want our pyramids to be. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you. Seriously, this is the kind of story that shows how much depth there is in ancient history when you really dig into it. Hit that subscribe button if you want more deep dives like this, and let me know in the comments what ancient economy you want me to explore next. There are so many incredible stories still waiting to be told. The pyramids weren't built by slaves. They were built by believers, by people who thought they were building something eternal. And you know what? They were right.